Sticks and stones may break my bones, but words can actually hurt me. Our first panelist, Stephen Bonnell, or as many people may know him online as Destiny. Destiny is a popular Twitch streamer and a YouTuber. Our next panelist, Milo Yiannopoulos, is an award-winning journalist, a New York Times selling best author, a comedian, an accomplished entrepreneur, and to the annoyance of many of his enemies, an exceedingly happy person. He's one of the most sought-after speakers anywhere, invited by foreign governments, wealthy individuals, and even the occasional private company to share his unique blend of laughter and war. His book, Dangerous, sold over 200,000 copies, despite never being reviewed at any major publication.
I'm sorry, I was very rude to him earlier because he said hello to me in the hotel lobby and I didn't realize.
I said hello to him and he just walked right away.
No, I didn't. I just saw him. I was like, oh fuck. No, I didn't realize because he was very polite and so I was like, hey Milo. I was like, hey, and then I just went back to my business. You have different hair on the internet. I'm sorry. I apologize. I was very rude to you at the hotel.
You're fine. Don't worry about it.
It's okay. I'm just the intro guy. It's all good. It's all good.
I know, but you've got this aura of authority, and you've got these suspenders. These suspenders, they command explanations.
Fair enough. And our moderator, Brandon Strzok. He's the founder of the Walkaway campaign, is a former liberal and former Democratic Party supporter who has very publicly walked away from the political left and created a social movement encouraging others to do the same. Brandon frequently provides commentary on Fox News as a recurring guest on Justice with Janine Pereiro, Fox and Friends, Tucker Carlson, Laura Ingraham, and many other television media outlets.
No, I don't like the masks.
Shady bitch.
No. You know, I'm not indifferent to you, but the social distancing is wonderful. Because it's how I wish everybody was all the time, because I can't stand anyone. The masks are a nightmare, but social distancing is fabulous. I never want it to go away.
Good evening, everybody. How are you all doing? All right. Hi. My name is Brandon Strzok. The name of our panel this evening is Sticks and Stones May Break My Bones, but Can Words Actually Hurt Me? You know, I was actually known for a brief time in 2018 as the poor man's Milo Yiannopoulos, so it's really a pleasure to be sitting here.
No, that was Chadwick Moore. You were the poor man's Milo Yiannopoulos in 2019.
It was still preferable. It was still preferable to the alternative, which was gay Candace Owens. I actually prefer this. All right. So, guys, I want to start off tonight by kind of just asking you to define for me and for the audience in your own terms. Just very simple question. I'm going to start with Milo. Milo, define hate speech. And before you answer, the reason why I'm asking this question, which is very basic, is that you are actually a very interesting character. I feel like I did a little research on you, and it's hard to actually pin down. You're not a typical, do you consider yourself a liberal?
Yeah, I would say so.
Okay, but you don't have particularly liberal views on speech, free speech, hate speech.
It depends. We'll get into it.
We'll get into it. Okay, great. So, Milo, can you define hate speech?
No, because nobody can.
Okay. Fair enough. Love it. Destiny, same question.
So hate speech, we can look at it at three different levels, basically, right? We've got legal definitions, we've got corporation definitions, and then we've got kind of our own personal, moral, ethical definitions. It really depends on the type of conversation we want to have. Like on the legal level, well, in America, I don't believe there's any definition for hate speech on the legal level. On the corporation level, usually hateful conduct is conduct that discriminates against like age, ethnicity, religion, whatever Twitter's, Facebook's, TOS says. And then on our own personal level, it means a lot of different things to a lot of different people, I guess.
So for the purpose of tonight's conversation, I think we're going to focus mostly on things like social justice, cancel culture, social media, how hate speech would apply to these kind of things. And so I didn't expect your definitions to be that brief, so we'll get right into the next segment, which is, can we compare emotional pain with physical pain? And so to get this kicked off, psychologists from Friedrich Schiller University in Germany had 16 subjects read pain-related words while imagining situations that corresponded to each word. During the experiments, participants had their brains scanned with functional magnetic resonance imaging. And the result was that Dr. Thomas Weiss told Live Science there was an activation in the pain matrix of the brain to subjects who heard pain words. So if we accept that there are reactions in the brain resulting from harmful words that are very similar to those when people feel physical pain, should we separate the two, Milo? Is emotional pain synonymous or worthy of discussion in regards to physical pain when it comes to being hurt by words?
Quite clearly, there are physical reactions observable from words. And it shouldn't surprise us, that shouldn't surprise anyone to hear me say, obviously words can be dangerous, words can be impactful, words can change the world. After all, they're proxies for ideas, which is about all we have. The question is can utterances, can something you say out loud affect material reality in a way that turns them into something a bit like magical spells? Can something that I say have a physical effect on you in a way that seems to reflect, in a sense, I guess, I mean, the closest thing I can think of prior to this debate popping up in the last 10 years is transubstantiation. And indeed, we're having this debate in the way that we're having it because our understanding of words and action is based in the incarnation. This is the linguistic and cultural basis of everything we're talking about. It is the Word made flesh. This is central Catholic doctrine. Transubstantiation. Can words become things? Can words affect things? Well, it seems to me that it's quite obvious that they can. You can produce particular reactions in people's brains, synapses, chemicals, and whatnot, with words they hear. The two questions, I suppose, are, if we agree that magical spells exist, one, do they operate independently of whether the subject knows what they're hearing? So can I avara cadabra you, and even if you don't know that spell, can you still be killed by it? And the second thing is, if we are going to allow that these magical spells exist, where in our model do we allow for the soul? We've got the body, we've got the mind, we have our studies, and he knows lots of these and has talked about them online a lot, and he's right about most of what he says. It can have a direct effect. But Descartes, I think, has misled us a little bit, and we're missing, in this question, the soul. And it's the soul that mediates the two. It is the soul that has the power to say, that hurt me, but I'm not going to let it ruin my life. And it seems from the studies that I can tell, it seems as far as I can tell from the studies, rather, that although children's brain chemistry, the white matter, can be changed by really heavily, properly abusive language in the early years, it seems to be that people develop a kind of resilience. And unfortunately, what a lot of these studies seem to be doing is presenting the case for bullying, which I support, because the purpose of the soul in this tripartite dynamic is the mediating layer between the two. There's this sort of words create a direct, chemical reaction, and then we have a moment where we can decide. Then we have agency. Then we have individual responsibility. It's at that point we can decide: is this going to be what and who I am from now on? Is this going to destroy my life? Am I going to get offended? And so, on the understanding of all that, can words create physical reactions? Absolutely. But are words violence in the way that a physical act is? I don't think so. Because if I punch you, it hurts whether you see it happen, whether you're even aware of it happening or not. But verbal abuse, if you like, doesn't function like that. There's something a bit more complicated going on, and it requires our participation. And our participation determines almost entirely what happens at the end of it.
I need to turn to Destiny with the same question, but one could certainly
I was done.
One could certainly argue that although the effects are different, the results of emotional pain can be much longer lasting and much more scarring than the temporary physical pain that somebody experiences from being punched. But I want to ask you, sir, the very same question. If we know, or if science is suggesting that the brain can react in a way to emotional pain or the feelings from words in a way that is similar to experiencing physical pain, is this something that we should be looking at and saying that we should be treating the two as equal?
I mean, we have different words for them for different reasons. They're both clearly very different things. I would agree with most of what Milo said. Obviously, verbal words can lead to some impact. And I would actually disagree with the idea that we have to recognize or that we have to participate in understanding those words. For instance, we just listened to a panel for an hour and a half where somebody me-tooing you or calling you racist or sexist or homophobic might have a big impact on your job, much the same way that breaking somebody's leg or slashing somebody's tire or something like that could. In terms of, should they be seen as the same? Obviously, they're quite different, but they could have different impacts. So I think it's important when we have a discussion on, like, can words hurt you? What level we're having the discussion at, In a very obvious way, somebody can't say something to me that's going to break my arm, but somebody could say something to the people around me that would inhibit my ability to work.
Do I call you Stephen or Destiny?
Stephen, please.
Okay, sorry. I apologize.
You all have such funny names. I had a conversation online with a Mr. Jingles.
Sorry about that.
Like a week ago. Do you remember that Mr. His name is Jingles, and now Destiny. It's all very. Thank you for Stephen.
To be fair, my
Stephen, if you don't
video
mind.
game name is Destiny. Your real life last name is Yiannopoulos, which is pretty funny, right?
It's worse than you think, because I grew up with my mum's surname. I actually changed it to my dad's surname. I chose to be Yiannopoulos. It's even worse than you imagine.
So, Milo, you began to transition to the next topic, which is do words lead to violence? And not so long ago, decriers of hate speech would often point to the connection between hateful speech leading to physical harm, citing that hate speech incites violence. Now, the more recent narrative seems to be that words are violence. So when words are violence, what should qualify as an incitement to violence? Stephen.
It's such a, I hate this because I'm going to say this at the start of a lot of answers, a very complicated question. Like when we say are words violence, the first question is, well, what kind of violence are we talking about? Are we talking about somebody getting fired from their job because somebody tweets that they are either an abuser or somebody that's racist? Some people would argue that's a type of violence. Are we talking about the type of violence where if you tweet something at somebody, they're driven to commit suicide? And that's a type of violence. Are we talking about just saying mean things to people on the internet without even really knowing who they are? Some people argue, well, that might be a type of violence. So I think the question.
Can I stop you for a second? Because I really want to examine the second one that you
Sure.
just said. If somebody said something to someone on social media that drove them to commit suicide, would you consider that an act of violence on behalf of the person who made the comment?
So, in a way, yes. I think what's important to understand when we talk about our words violence, just because I acknowledge that something could be violent or offensive, doesn't mean that I necessarily think that that thing shouldn't exist. There's a lot of things we can say that can be taken in an incredibly offensive manner. There are lots of things that we could say that down the road could lead to some sort of violent action. I think it's important that if we acknowledge that free speech is important, which I think it is, unlike the lawyer that was up here earlier, I like the U.S. free speech laws way more than the U.K. ones. I don't think you should be thrown in jail for teaching your dog how to do a Nazi salute. But if we are going to acknowledge that freedom of speech is really important, which I think it is, we need to understand the downsides to that as well, so that we can, address them and deal with them properly in society when they come up.
Well, when we hear, I think nowadays, when we hear things like words or violence, I feel like it's most commonly used in the context of pronouns, discussions on race. I have some of these questions coming up later, but I mean, while we're here right now, in your opinion, is misgendering somebody violence?
These words are usually a proxy for other activities, and that's what nobody realizes, I don't think anybody actually cares if you misgender them one time accidentally. People walk around acting like if you accidentally misgender someone on the street, they're going to call the SJW police from Canada over, the C-16 division is going to throw you in, some Canadian moose jail or something. I think the problem is that usually that type of aggressive behavior goes along with other things too, like, hey, I don't like you because of who you are, I'm not going to give you any good jobs, I'm not going to give you any good promotions, I'm going to pay you less, I'm going to treat you like shit. I think that these things tend to go hand in hand with each other. I think that saying words are violence is a little bit simplistic, but I also think it's a little bit silly to say, oh, well, they're only words. Well, usually these words are paired along with other types of actions. Everybody on this stage knows it, that people that say certain things act in certain ways as well, and I think it's important to recognize that.
Milo, is misgendering somebody violence?
No, of course not. It's absurd to say that it is. And I think we have to dilute the definition of violence down to the point where it means the same thing as hate speech now means, which is there are as many different definitions of it as there are, citizens of the United States. It's just stupid. It becomes, we get to the point where it just doesn't mean anything anymore. And quite clearly, these videos of people losing their mind, it's ma'am, are very much on the whole, they're the exception and not the rule. There does seem to be a particular problem with transgender people being a little quick to temper, let's say. Maybe it's part and parcel of a package of various dysfunctions that they have. But on the whole, people getting very, very upset about these things are not actually getting upset. They're making a conscious decision to be offended. And that's quite clearly not in response to a violent action. That is taking a political position. And very often a lot of this stuff, it's important to bear in mind, is not really about whether or not you hurt me or not. A lot of the stuff that's going on in America at the moment, particularly with race, but also with a lot of these other categories of people and the various linguistic demands they're making on you, is jockeying for status. Now, where I come from in Britain, you listen to someone talk who sounds like me, and you would make very quick and very obvious and mostly correct assessments of where I come from in society. You'd be able to figure out what kind of house I grew up in. You'd be able to tell what sort of school I went to. You'd know the kinds of books I read, and you'd know what my friends look like. But in America, things are very different. Those categories are much muddier. And that's because largely the class system's been replaced with mercantilism and money. Capitalism is the only class system in this country, really, and the only dynasties you have here are financial dynasties, not really, when it comes down to it, ethnic or even educational ones. So what we're really seeing, it seems to me, with race and with women, with a lot of different racial groups, and even now with transgender people, is jockeying for social status. Because even though America doesn't have clearly delineated class categories, everyone is very acutely aware of where they sit in the hierarchy and very sensitive to slights. And there's a lot of what goes on in American public life is dishonest and is conversation at one level removed from what's really happening. And what's really happening is people are working out what the pecking order is. And in American society, we are currently in a situation where nobody actually really knows. We've got this very febrile environment in which black people are still trying to achieve socioeconomic equality with whites, although they have largely achieved cultural equality, where women don't know where the hell they are because they're told completely different things by everybody. So nobody really knows where they are in the hierarchy. Most of what we're talking about, I see sociologically as jockeying for status. And I think that this idea that getting down this rabbit hole of language being violent and people inflicting damage on one another with misgendering, this is a very secondary issue to what's actually going on, which is really much more to do with class.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
I feel like in some ways I agree, but I guess it depends on what you mean. When you say jockeying for status, does that include like gay people that want to get married? Does that include women that want the right to have medical procedures on their body without the government intervening? Does that include trans people that might want to serve in the military? Does that include black people that take issue with being arrested for far greater rights for doing right? Like we call these just social things.
But they're all status questions. They're all questions about which groups have access to which kinds of civil rights.
Sure.
Those are status questions.
That's a far different connotation, because when you say status, it sounds like you're saying like who's going to show up first in my Twitter feed, not who's going to be arrested for which crime or who's going to have which civil liberties available to them in society.
Well, they're all very closely linked, and we can see weird dysfunctional hierarchies of these different groups on particular social networks that don't look like the real world at all. The social hierarchy, for instance, the status hierarchy on Twitter, is almost a direct inversion of many status hierarchies in the real world. So I think they're all very closely related, and I think we're kind of talking about the same thing.
I would completely disagree. I think that the reality of online social media is entirely unlinked from the realities, the political realities that we face. You can read study after study of how online Twitter is way whiter, more college educated, more likely to be male. Different online environments are more likely to be overrepresented by different people. For instance, the people that use Tumblr are far different than the people that use Facebook, which are far different than the people that use Twitter. The idea that the rights that people fight for on Twitter, which is usually, my favorite pundit got banned for 7 days for tweeting something stupid. I think that those conversations are a lot different, and I would even say a lot less serious than, as a woman, do I have a right to get an abortion without being obstructed by some weird state statute that says I have to see a picture of a baby floating in my womb for 6 days first?
I think we can agree that there is a difference in seriousness.
Okay.
I think maybe what I was saying is that I'm analyzing all of this stuff through the same lens, and what we're talking about specifically there conforms to that lens, which I see to be the key to unlocking American society. But of course, I obviously agree with you that racial inequalities in the criminal justice system and access to abortion are far more serious and pressing issues than the linguistic games that we seem to be so worried about.
Sure.
But I find something that Milo said to be interesting, and I want to get your reaction to it. When he's talking about the inversion on social media of certain statuses, I think, what is your opinion about that? It sounded like you disagreed at first.
No,
I think you agree with him because he went through all these social networks where he said they are all completely different.
But was your point essentially that maybe racial minorities or maybe LGBT people actually have more privilege on social media than perhaps white people?
I don't think they exercise it because they're often not present there. But that doesn't mean that the people who are present there don't create hierarchies that privilege them. So Twitter is white and college educated, but it is a place of social justice where people of color, disabled people, trans people, the rest of it, are privileged above others in all kinds of practical, obvious ways. So it just because black people don't see the point of Twitter and aren't on it doesn't mean that the privilege hierarchy there doesn't favor them.
And that's, something you could even go a step farther with that. If I go on Twitter and I say I hate black people, we need to get rid of all black people, I'd obviously be in big trouble for it. Not that I can.
You get in more trouble on white Twitter than you would for saying it, in Brixton or in Camden, New Jersey.
Sure, but on the flip side, you can get a ton of people that go on and say we need the Mayo side, kill all white people, hashtag or whatever, and they don't seem to get in trouble for it. So there does seem to be some level of inversion there. But again, I would like to stress that the conversations that happen on Twitter are so far removed from the political realities that like working class or middle class people live in that I think make it a separate conversation.
We would
even if
agree
they are
on
kind
more of those than you probably imagine.
Probably, yeah. One thing that I do think that Milo said that is incredibly true, and maybe braver than he thinks, that the last panel came so close to understanding, is that a lot of this stuff, when we talk about like SJWism and wokeism, does actually come down to class issues. If you're ever curious why a corporation favors a certain policy, it's not usually because they're trying to maximize their wokeness or they want to be as diverse as possible. It's usually because they're just trying to make as much money as possible. And generally, being woke and being more inclusive to different types of people is usually the safest way to make a lot of money.
Right, and the stupid party, the Republican Party, does not seem to understand this about corporate America, which is why it can't fight it. Because it does not realize that the incentives and the imperatives of big business may be completely different from those in the academy, but that does not mean that they won't use the same strategies to achieve them, because those are the prestige mass market cultural values at the present time. And that's what graduates expect who are coming out of these awful universities. So I agree, again.
100%, and I agree as well. And that's why Republicans are very free market, open market, no government intervention.
Which is stupid of them.
But as soon as we start talking about social media platforms, well, now we sound like Venezuela trying to nationalize our social media platforms.
No,
like,
I'm all for nationalizing Twitter. My problem is with the... My problem is... No, look.
You two are becoming best friends.
I'm all for nationalizing Twitter. My problem is with the hands-off, red and tooth and claw, no borders, rampant free marketeerism, which clearly doesn't work. I came to America like almost every other, I suppose I've always been characterized as quote-unquote far right. I came to America wide-eyed and amazed by this fabulous wonderland where the free market solves everything. It fucking doesn't. It hasn't. And I've been very, very quickly disillusioned by it. By living here. And by living here in this time, in this place especially, in the 80s, it probably would have been different. But right now, no, I'm heading in very much the other direction.
100%. The free market does solve for one thing, and that's the maximization of profits. Not freedom of speech, not freedom of expression, just to make money. That's all capitalists want to do.
Maybe we're not as close as I thought.
Sure.
I mean, it is also obviously the greatest engine of prosperity. Has lifted more people out of absolute poverty everywhere in the world
100%,
than any other system.
I agree.
So,
I'm very much a neoliberal.
Then we're okay. Then we're okay.
I'm not going to pretend that capitalism is going to give me a marketplace of ideas on Twitter. It's going to give me what the Twitter shareholders want to see. That makes them the most money for advertisers.
The stupid party wants to see capitalism unfettered, which we know leads to all kinds of absurdities, abuses, and ugliness. I have found myself returning to what is a more Trumpian position, for instance, not only in terms of protectionism and national industries and all the rest of it, but also that big companies need guardrails, and sometimes they need to be broken up. And when a company has a complete and total monopoly on a certain type of speech, especially a kind of speech, I'm trying to bring it back for you, as a certain type of speech without which people in particular professions, especially very successful, popular people in those particular professions, cannot function without those tools, there's a very powerful argument for regulation, which is why Twitter should either be nationalized or broken up or heavily regulated.
Perfect, thank you. So on the topic of social media implications, Stephen, in a live stream debate on freedom of speech in September of 2018, you took a position on free speech that you are in favor of aggressively deplatforming those who engage in speech that is deliberate misinformation or gross misuse of information. Do you still hold those beliefs, and why?
Absolutely. So when we talk about whether or not words are violence or whether or not words can directly translate into violence, I do think that there are forms of speech that can be grossly negligent, where you can draw a straight line from the damaging things that somebody says to the damaging effects that they have. For the right, we complain that liberal college professors do this all the time, that they give a certain type of speech, students walk out of those college classrooms and they're indoctrinated neo-Marxist, postmodern, neoliberal, whatever, neo-progressive, whatever new buzzword the conservatives are using those days. And then on the flip side, you've got people like, I can point to Donald Trump. He comes out and he says, hey, there's a medication, hydroxychloroquine. It's great. And all of a sudden, now the people that actually need this medication can't buy it anymore because everybody's buying it. And that's just a piece of misinformation that once uttered causes like demonstrable harm in the real world. And I do think there needs to be some look at like that spread of misinformation, because it's destroying our ability to have conversation online. I don't need to talk to Milo about people having bad opinions or ideas of you that have absolutely zero foundation in reality, just because people go on and just make up whatever lie gets them the most amount of views, the most amount of hits, and then the most amount of ad revenue.
Right, and I've been on the receiving end of that a lot. I agree with you completely, and actually something people don't often know, they think that the Supreme Court definition of free speech is circumscribed by a couple of limitations, whether the speech is likely to cause imminent, immediate physical violence or is likely to provoke it. But there are other things too that the Supreme Court has said do not fall under full First Amendment protections. Corporate speech, speech for commercial purposes, but also copyrighted speech that someone else owns. I mean, if we had a system in Europe where you could more aggressively sue for that, I could put Turning Point USA out of business tomorrow. For everything they do is ripped directly from my 2015 college speeches. We don't have that, but there are also other things, and I think it's more like a sort of European model that you're suggesting, which I kind of agree with, and I think this is actually what Trump wants too. When Trump was saying that we should punish journalists who print misinformation, my reading of what he said was, perhaps I'm being generous, but my understanding of what he meant was deliberate, malicious untruths. In other words, malicious libel. So we have laws for that in Europe. The UK has very tough laws. If you print something about somebody in a newspaper, you have to, if you're responsible, the editor will ask you, can you prove in court this is true? Because otherwise we can't print it. Now, maybe that goes a little bit too far. Maybe the bar is a little bit too high in Britain, and it does seem to be subject to abuse by the rich and powerful who find little, clauses that aren't even particularly damaging, take people to court, win whatever, and publications end up closing. But I agree with you. I'm sorry to say, it's very disappointing for all of you. It's a terrible night for you all. I'm sorry. What a finale this is. I have to agree with you that the ideal legal position has got to be somewhere between the free-for-all we have in America, where people can cause purposeful commercial harm with malicious, deliberate untruths, which right now you can get away with if you're a journalist in America. You can say whatever the hell you want. And the British model, which is a little too draconian, in which you can't publish anything unless you can prove it with documents in front of a judge. Somewhere in between those two is the right answer. UK is wrong, we are wrong, but somewhere in the middle is the right answer.
But the question was about deplatforming. The question was about deplatforming, so I'm surprised to hear you saying that you agree so much. And
well, I went further than deplatforming. I don't just want companies to do it. I want the law to step in. I want the government to step in. When a journalist publishes something they know is not true, and that's a high bar to clear. If you're if you are the subject of libel, of defamation like that, you have to prove they knew it was untrue, or you have to prove to a judge or a jury's satisfaction that it's highly likely that they knew it was untrue when they published it. Not easy to do.
In the U.S., almost impossible to do that.
Do we not have the right to get wrong information?
You cannot do it here, period. Even in Britain, quite a high bar to clear. But I want to go further. When somebody publishes something materially damaging to your commercial interest, like, for instance, when the press says Milo Yiannopoulos called Leslie Jones a monkey, called her an ape. Never happened, disgusting, a lie, horrible. I was on CNN Money the next day saying, I didn't do it, other people did it. I'm not responsible for what they say. You can say, maybe I should tell my followers, but I don't consider that to be my responsibility. When that's been on CNN Money, when CNN.com then says the following day, Milo Yiannopoulos called Leslie Jones an ape, and there's no tweets that say it, I've denied it in an interview, they cannot produce the evidence, that deserves a response, and it deserves a legal response.
But this, I feel like, begs the obvious question. who decides what is accurate information? Who decides what is truthful information?
Well, that's what
And
the
do we not
judiciary
have
is
the
there for.
right?
That's what the judiciary is there for.
Well,
No,
so
no,
it
but
depen-
he
it
brought
depends
up
on
the
the pla-
example of
Yeah, it depends on the platform as well. So if we're talking about something posted on, Twitter, well, maybe that would be that platform's job to figure it out. If we're talking about things that rise to the level of legal things, so say defamation or libel, maybe that would be the job of a judge to figure out or a court to figure out. This idea that people always act like this is like a killer question, like, well, how do we figure that out? Well, I don't know. How do we figure out what's inappropriate or obscene material to show children?
How do you figure out if someone kills someone?
Yeah,
You
like
know,
the
it's just-
Supreme
it's all-
Court
it's the
for
same
inappropriate or
question.
obscene material, it's literally like, I'll know it when I see it. That's like a literal Supreme Court saying for how they figure it out.
That's
Is it hard to
obscenity.
do? It's absolutely difficult to do. The thing that irritates me about this conversation is that if you want to say that we should be free speech absolutists, if you want to say that we should be able to get on and say whatever we want, that's fine. I think that's even a defensible position. Just don't sit here and pretend like it's going to be all perfect and the best ideas are going to rise to the top.
It's going to
and
be
people,
ugly.
Yeah,
it's going
to be disgusting.
Just
of course.
like capitalism. Just like when
Yep,
we took
100%.
just like when we took the guardrails off American capitalism. Look what happened. Lots of amazing things, and let's be clear. Mostly amazing things, but also some absolutely dreadful things. That is going to happen with free speech, absolutely. I do think there is a difference with monopolistic companies that occupy monopolistic positions. So I would, ironically, I would like to see a Twitter that is required to have working, well-known journalists active on their platform and able to express themselves however they want. The consequences for that expression should be in a court of law, depending on what they say about other people. But when you cannot be a working journalist without Twitter, we got to do something about that. When you cannot be a functioning media figure or internet personality without Facebook, and Facebook has called me a dangerous individual, and their definition of dangerous individual includes people traffickers, international terrorists. And when they first dropped this policy, and they had to roll this back within 24 hours, two things were true about dangerous individuals. The first one, you couldn't mention them on Facebook unless you said something bad about them. So you could only mention me on Facebook if it was to ridicule or criticize me. So this is a step beyond, free speech. This is literally delving into your brain and saying, this is what you're allowed to think about this person, and this is how you're allowed to express those thoughts. And even worse than that, and this is directly pertinent to our discussion, as originally written and published, and this was vetted by Facebook's lawyers, this is one of the biggest companies, one of the most powerful, richest companies in the world, multinational, conglomerate, whatever, as originally written until they were forced to back down, this dangerous individuals policy, which has been leveraged almost exclusively against conservative media figures who get too popular and successful, Facebook's policy said, if you are one of the dangerous individuals, we will permit death threats against you on our platform, even immediate credible death threats. This is the kind of death threat that the Supreme Court has said does not enjoy any First Amendment protection. And it is also, by the way, it should go without saying, a crime. These are death threats that are against the law, that if you do them, you will probably go to jail, or you will, at a bare minimum, get in a lot of trouble. This, Facebook said, was specifically permitted in the case of these dangerous individuals, of which I am one, Laura Loomer, Gavin McInnes, Roger Stone, Alex Jones. That's insane. And that's a point at which the government should step in.
I'm not entirely sure Facebook allowed that, because I know that I've known a lot of people personally, being on the left, and sometimes more extreme friends that have gotten in trouble for levying death threats across these platforms to other people.
Well, it was only for 24 hours, and they got bullied into removing that one.
Sure,
so,
okay.
so what's on there now is you're only allowed to mention certain people's names if in a negative context. What they originally published, the day they published it, it said no death threats, no credible death threats, no immediate death threats, no intentions, expressions, or glorifications of violence, except in the case of dangerous individuals. It was an explicit entreaty, dare I say it, invitation to smatter Facebook with death threats about the people that it had designated to be dangerous individuals. So that was rolled back very fast within a couple of days.
For the people that listen to this, and the concept of freedom of speech, is like, oh my God, this is so wrong. Just as a reminder, this is Facebook exercising their First Amendment right. When you talk about free speech absolutism, part of that is, well, if I'm an entity and I own a platform, I could decide what goes on it. That's my freedom of speech. If you oppose Facebook's ability to limit or curtail what people post on their platform, then you're actually obstructing their freedom of speech as a corporation or legal individual to do so, which is something you have to understand.
This is why being a free speech absolutist, although
nonsense.
I may have been one of the best known ones, possibly the best known one half a decade ago, is an ultimately insupportable position.
Of course.
Because it creates mayhem.
Stephen, if you support aggressively deplatforming those who engage in deliberate misinformation, gross misuse of information, then where do you draw the line? What about parody?
It would have to be determined by I guess I don't know if you would have like a
What if I
an
created a
independent
YouTube
arbitration
channel?
thing that does it. You could have it on. Yeah, I mean, like if you're clearly known as like a parodied person, right? If Nathan For You does a skit on anti-vaccination, I'm probably going to take that a lot more as a parody than if Alex Jones comes out and says vaccines don't work. Like I'm not really sure. When it comes to satire or parody, I mean, we make those decisions culturally. Is that guy joking? Is that guy not joking? And in a legal sense, we kind of make those distinctions as well, right? Like parody is literally a part of copyright law. Can I take your song and make my own song over it? Well, whether or not you can or can't depends on how transformative that content is.
Making the decisions culturally, to me, or as a society, feels you're kind of making an assumption that we're all on the same page, which
Of course
we
not.
absolutely are not.
We're not, but I mean, we make a lot of people. It's funny because they think that our values come from the law. The law is informed by what we believe culturally. The law will follow what culturally we deem to be acceptable.
Yeah,
it's happened with gay marriage. It's
can't-
going to happen with marijuana.
we
Like the law will follow.
We cannot legislate away cancel culture. Let's be clear, right? You can't pass a law just because it is an ugly ugly runaway train right now. You can't legislate it away. It's wrong and it's destructive and it creates racists and it creates sexists and the manner in which it operates, the punitive and vicious, indiscriminate and disproportionate manner in which cancel culture operates creates exactly the evil that it is purporting to defend against. And I suspect that for many people, that's part of the point, because I think the left has a bit of a, as Douglas Murray puts it, a supply and demand problem with bigotry. I don't think there are enough racists around, so the left has to create a few more of them with this shit. And I think they have. And they do it in a variety of ways. I mean, George Floyd made no sense unless it was clearly your objective to make more white racists. Well, congratulations, you did. America's at least 20% more racist post George Floyd. I think it was on purpose. Finally, perhaps we can find a point of difference. But cancel culture, you can't legislate away. You just have to viciously punish the people who are doing it. Unfortunately, when they occupy prestige positions that are protected by monopolies, which are not regulated, and there's no protection in law for vicious, untrue statements made about people, these are the two problems we want to fix. Those are the conditions under which cancel culture emerges. If we fix those two things, cancel culture would not flourish like it does. It would be a much lesser problem.
And I think real quick, when we talk about cancel culture, I might get some pushback immediately, but I think that all of us are pro cancel culture. Usually what we argue about is like how wide or narrow should that band of cancellation be, If our employer liked an Alex Jones video, should he be fired as our boss because he's, compromised? Probably
You're
not.
very mean about Alex. You got a hard on for
Sure.
InfoWars.
Yeah, I bring him up like
you got
we're
a
talking about
stonker
conspiracy
for
theories,
Alex,
okay?
haven't you? Pick a different example, for God's sake.
Okay, how about if they like a
people will
Milo,
say they're in love.
Sure. If they like
People
a
will
Milo
say they're in
Yiannopoulos
love.
tweet, for instance, okay? So we know that they're hateful and anti-whatever. But like, if we have a boss, for instance, that goes out publicly every single night and they scream from the street corner, I hate black people, I hate black people, if I had the chance, I'd kill them all, blah, 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 blah. Maybe we wouldn't want this guy as a boss, right? Like, is it cancel culture to say that not every single person ought to be on every single platform?
No,
if a guy goes on a platform and says, I think I should be able to post pictures of underage children.
No,
Probably, I think most people would be opposed to that. So
We're
sometimes I
just
think
saying
that
there should be social consequences for bad
when
behavior.
when we talk about cancel culture, my main worry about cancel culture isn't that we cancel people, it's that sometimes that band becomes very narrow, where it feels like there's a sizable portion of the country that wants every single person that votes Republican out of a job, that's scary to me.
Well,
but I don't think that's the same as saying, like, if you get on, some massive platform and say, well, I don't think vaccines work, don't do it, and now we've got people that are dying of the fucking measles in the United States. Like, holy shit, like, something has to change here. And I don't think it's like an all or nothing, like, we can't cancel anybody, or we have to cancel everybody kind of
Hey
thing.
guys,
I
if I
agree
may,
with all that, but
we
we've
have a
got
whole
to-
segment about cancel culture coming up.
We'll get to it, but I'm going to help you again.
Well, I don't need you to
one of the
help me,
things
but
that-
I have two more questions for Steven about social media
She's getting
implications
assertive now.
before we get there. So, two more quick questions for Steven about social media. Steven, in a live stream debate with, and I apologize if I'm saying this wrong, Bastiat, you said, I think there are strong arguments for nationalizing certain platforms like Facebook and Twitter, and do you still agree with that position?
Yeah, I mean, I think that what Milo said earlier seems to be
I
true.
didn't know
Like,
you said that. I'm so upset about how this evening is going.
yeah, I know. Unfortunately, I actually said it just
This
before I
is
came in.
going to do you just as much damage as it
Yeah,
does me.
The problem is that. But the difference is
My
I'll be
only
consistent. I'll be
solace.
consistent with my arguments. When I say that, like, perhaps we need to look at, the strength of some of the social media platforms to where if you're banned from Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube, I don't know how much of a public voice you actually have anymore. I'm not actually sure how effective you could be as a communicator. But I would extend that to go like, well, maybe we should increase, like the strength of unions. I don't know if you can negotiate against an employer or whatever. Like, I'll carry that to its logical extreme. I won't just stop conveniently at social media because that's the only thing I care about, because that's the only thing I post on. But yeah, I think there can be very good arguments made for the idea that if you get deplatformed across every single large social media, you've essentially lost your public square. Like, in a way, that is the new public square in the United States and in the world.
Right, and you know, as patient zero, like I'm over it. It's fine. But this was like I'm happy. I'm semi-retired. I live with a supermodel. I'm good. But I did used to make a hell of a lot more money, and I did used to be a lot better and more effective at my job. And for the kinds of people who like me and agreed with my points of view, it's not a good thing now that I can't go out and speak in public. That I have to have some absolutely terrifying guy like shadow me everywhere I go so I don't get killed. These are not good things. And I wouldn't like it if it happened to somebody on the left either, because I think it poisons and poisons is too waffly a word. What I mean specifically is it impoverishes public debate. Why? Because the people in power don't take out extremists on the other side. They take out the most effective people on the other side. So this is why you see Stone, Loomer, Yiannopoulos, McGuinness, and Jones taken out on the right. David Duke still has his Twitter. Richard Spencer still has his Twitter.
Nick Fuentes still has
well, I don't put Nick Fuentes in the same category, but this is a conversation for another day. They don't take out the extremists on the other side. They don't take out the people with actually socially unacceptable points of view. They take out the people on the other side who are making their life difficult. And that's you know why you shouldn't rejoice when you see it happen on either side. My big move, my evolution, my growth with this question over the last 5 years is, it didn't work taking the moral high ground, and these principles are all fine. Maybe we should just lean into these new speech codes. Maybe we should bring blasphemy laws back. I mean, after all, they did work, so perhaps we should just forget all this shit and instead try to pass a law that makes it illegal to speak ill of Jesus Christ. That makes it illegal to deny the incarnation, to deny the Trinity, to speak critically of the orthodoxies and the catechism of the Roman Catholic Church. I quite like that. I'd wave that through. So because I kind of know where the questions are going roughly, I think my big movement on this from 5 years ago is if we've lost the war for high principle and we're going to go in for these speech codes, why don't we, let's figure out what they're going to look like and who gets to make them, because we can agree dismally and miserably for both of us on high-minded matters of principle as educated and attentive observers of what's been going on for the last 5 or 10 years, but quite clearly reasonable people like this are not in charge of what's going on. So maybe we need a revival of the religious right. If the social justice is getting too out of control, if the left is getting too out of control, if they're canceling people for saying what did Julie Bindel say? A bedwetter in a bad wig is still a man. If they cancel people for that, maybe we just need our own version. And maybe, in fact, the religious right, but with religious right, but better on Twitter, is actually what we need now. So that's my great moral quandary at the moment.
I'm going to go ahead and say that we don't need that.
Well, you
Thank
see,
you.
this audience is not yet caught up from 2016. They don't
All right.
realize it's 2020 yet, and the world has moved on.
Final question for Stephen in the social media. In the same live stream I was describing, you stated...
You were a really big fan of the stream, weren't you?
Yeah. Well, I
How many
watched like
quotes did
2
you
of your
get from
I
it?
watched like
It's
a
the
little
only
bit.
one he watched.
Did a little research.
Yeah, it sounds like it, yeah.
In the same...
It's like when you do that school project, you got 32 quotes from the same source, and then you've got like 2 quotes from Wikipedia. It's like,
In the same live
And
stream,
all the other links on Wikipedia.
you stated about Milo Yiannopoulos.
Uh-oh.
You stated about Milo
we were
Yiannopoulos.
getting-
Oh, this is good. Finally, we can
We
fight
were
on something.
getting on so
Finally, we can fight on
well.
something. Tell me, what did I say?
We were getting on so well.
Well, it's about to change.
All I want to know is if he lied, because if he lied, he's a hypocrite because he's breaking his own fucking rules. So go.
Let me
See
read
it.
the question.
This is from 2018, though. World has changed a
You
lot.
said-
right?
Oh, no, I said 2016.
You guys are very nervous all of a sudden. Listen.
You're on thin ice now. Look at you. That's the first. Look, I'm a fidgeter. Everyone thinks I'm on coke. I'm just like
All
this.
All right. Did I call him a white nationalist or a Nazi?
no,
Tell me. Just
listen.
get the
He's
words
not.
out. Let's go.
Look at him
Just read
sitting
it
forward
off.
in his chair. He's worried
Oh,
now.
man.
Listen, I would
Let's see.
I wanna, Hey, I want to get
What did he say about me?
I want to get through
Because
this.
I'm lovely.
I would like to get through this
Very
quote.
reasonable. And apparently we agree on everything. So whatever he says about me must be true of him. What does
Milo.
he call me?
All right. Well, I would like to get through this uninterrupted. Let me say.
I can't promise that, but come on.
You stated about Milo Yiannopoulos. I fucking hate Milo. That little fucking piece of shit.
That's fine.
Dumb fuck, motherfucker.
Fine.
Pedophile, homophobic piece of shit.
Oh, dear.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
Oh, dear.
Sounds like a Destiny stream to me, yeah.
Do you stand by those statements today, and why did you call Milo that in the first place?
Well, there was a lot of insults in there. Which one you want?
Well,
Well, I can live with dumb fuck. I can live with motherfucker. I
So
can
let's
live
go to
with
let's go to
piece
the
of
two most inflammatory
and
ones.
to be-
Why
no,
did
and-
you call him
no,
a pedophile?
And to be clear, homophobe is true.
shit. Yeah, but why did you call him a pedophile?
Yeah, so the homophobe one, so the pedophile one was, I took great issue with a stream that you had where you made it sound like it was a necessary part of the gay experience to have a relationship with an older man. That was something that struck me the wrong way for sure.
Okay, I think what I said was, as a recipient of that relationship, as the younger party in it, and not the older party in it, it can be beneficial for some of those young men because they, when their families reject them, somebody can kind of inculcate them into life, someone can accept them, various things like that. This got grotesquely misrepresented by the right, incidentally, and then places like Newsweek, rather than saying, which is, this slippery, disgusting thing, has been accused of covering for pedophiles, which was a lie, total and complete lie, has been accused of being soft on pedophiles. Newsweek eventually contracted this to has been accused of pedophilia. And when I got in touch with them, they changed it very, very fucking fast. But I am going to give you the benefit of the doubt and say that you were just reeling off insults, and I won't hold it against you.
Okay,
So
well,
you're
I
not
appreciate
offended.
it.
I don't really get offended. I mean, I've said far worse things about myself than anything he can come up with.
Are you sorry you said it?
I'm sure we both have. No, come on.
That,
What are we
come
doing
on,
here?
that's bullshit. No, don't do that to him.
I wanna know.
His fan base will never forgive him. He's going to have to do a Fauci
First
now.
of all,
He's
my
gonna have to do a Fauci
my
now.
fan base hates me
Dude,
for half the things I say
is
on any
going
given
to a
day.
protest more likely to get you COVID? Well, any large guy, you're going to have to make him do a Fauci. Don't
I know,
make him
but
do
part
that.
of your
Don't
argument-
put him in that position.
I'm
No,
not-
so I stand
it's
by.
nice,
I
real
stand by.
question. Look.
No, so I stand by what I said. And I feel
Brandon,
But
like
that's not
come-
perpetrating misinformation?
no, I feel like if you ask me to expand on that, I might have even in that stream. I don't know if that was just a string of insults where we were going more. I feel like the displaying that like these kind of like adult adolescent sexual relationships can be healthy for people, even if in some reality that might be true. I feel like it's a really harmful thing to perpetuate. I would never.
Okay, but that doesn't. That's a very different thing to claiming that somebody fucks children.
No,
which
I
is
would-
what
yeah,
you're
no, sure,
claiming
sure,
when
that's
you
true.
call someone a pedophile. So by your definition, you're in jail.
Oh shit. Good thing I live in the other country though.
Finally, a little heat. Finally. All right, listen, guys.
I'm fine. I'm over it. I'm good. Like, nobody could do any more damage to me than has been already done, and in some cases I did myself. But just to be strictly accurate, when I mean about people, I pick things that are real and true, and it's important to be careful about your insults because something like that, for instance, doesn't hurt. You could see it didn't really. I was like, yeah, okay, I've heard that a million times before. Not particularly cutting. Whereas if you come this evening and said, Jesus Christ, you put on 25 pounds since 2016, that would be both true and hurtful.
Sure, I would qualify what I say then. Instead of calling him a pedophile, maybe I would say pedophilic ideology enabler. I would
Well,
say
I would
that.
disagree with that, but at least it's not going to get you in jail according to your own.
Thank you.
Your own,
That's right.
okay, fine. Let's move on, shall we?
Perfect. So moving
Oh, from your next live stream, Destiny, you called Milo what's
back to the topic of cancel culture for a moment. We see a lot of times these days not just canceling people for something that they say or may have said or there's some sort of implication, but people are actually digging back now to tweets 5 years old, 10 years old, or even video content that was created in the 90s or whatever. So should we be canceling people based off of things that they said in the past?
as much as I hate to agree with one thing that was said in an earlier panel, something that is absolutely true is we are not allowed to grow and change as public figures. Every single thing you've ever said at any point in your life is constantly the thing that you always believe right now, no matter how contradictory it might be to things that you've said currently. You can go back in time to any figure. And the problem is, like, I say this all the time. I'm so glad that when I grew up, when I was a teenager, there wasn't as much social media that is like, as permanent as it is now, right? Nobody has a link to those old MySpaces or LiveJournals or Zangas. You can find all sorts of horrible, stupid shit that people say at all points in their life. The idea that if you ever own up to any of it, or if you apologize for any of it, or you recognize any of it from 5 or 10 years ago, that people are going to try to destroy you, that's absolutely insane to me.
Yeah, it's somebody came up with a good expression for it, offense archaeology. I actually don't mind or blame people, especially when they just say, nope, wasn't me, must have got hacked. Like Joy Reid did. I think it was Joy Reid, wasn't it, on MSNBC?
Why would you ever acknowledge any of it? Yeah, there's no point.
No, she had some old blog post where she wasn't particularly nice about gays or something, and I read it and I was like, she's not wrong. But no, I mean, she basically came out and said someone hacked my blog and retroactively dated these posts and inserted them in there. Obviously a lie, but do I care? Not especially, because if she's a black woman coming from a particular community that has particular views. I mean, her views on homosexuality are very mild compared to what you would find in a lot of black Pentecostal churches. And I'm not asking the offense police to start knocking down the door and arresting pastors. And I don't think that her pandering to homophobic sensibilities, whether or not she has those beliefs herself at the time, now, whatever. All the wrong questions were asked. The fact that she had an old blog post, it's inexcusable for people to go back and sort of and surface this stuff later. And for her to turn around, wasn't me, got hacked. I kind of thought, you know what, fair play, girl. I don't blame you. The only question that should have been asked is, whether or not this was or wasn't you, what do you actually believe about it today? That's the only thing I really care about.
Yeah, and I think that's the important thing. If somebody says something and you're not really sure how to take it today, and we kind of go back a little bit, and you can establish like a pretty clear pattern of like, oh, well, you said this 2 years ago, you said this 3 years ago, maybe it looks like you kind of do mean this thing. I think that can be valid. But this idea of going back, like 10 years ago, you tweeted this, kind of racist joke, so now you are currently like the most racist person. I think this is ridiculous. It's such a waste of time. There's so many more important things to talk about.
But it's also insincere. Because what it means is that you've watched the person closely in the present day and you've been unable to find anything good.
So you have to go back 10 years to find an example of it. Yeah.
I haven't always been the nicest guy to my employees. Some of them I've treated very well, some of them I have not treated so well. And one of the ones that I did not treat so well sold my entire email archive to BuzzFeed. And a story came out of this where I was apparently, quote unquote, close to white nationalists. What was actually happening was I was just buttering them up for a story like any journalist does. But with the emails they had, they could construct a fairly persuasive case. And, BuzzFeed being BuzzFeed, who can blame them? They did the best with what they had. What they could not produce was a single, in this apparent example of me being, adjacent to or fully paid up member of white nationalism, a single example of me expressing an opinion in 9 years of emails that was even remotely racially insensitive. Not a single word that was remotely critical or insensitive or offensive towards black people, because they didn't exist. So they had to instead go back into history and construct something using this offense archaeology. So, not just because I've experienced it too, I have not done it to anyone without. I have written pieces about people based on their past actions that I have uncovered. When I have approached them and said, do you still hold these views? And they have said yes or not answered, or I found evidence that they have continued to hold those views into the present day. But other than that, I don't think I've ever done it because I think it's disgusting.
Stephen, you made a comment a moment ago about how in cancel culture we're not really allowed to evolve at this point. Do you feel like there's a double standard that falls along political party lines? Because I look around sometimes and I see maybe comments Joe Biden made, certain people who tend to fall on the left make, and whether they be racially insensitive comments, they may be homophobic comments, but it's, well, I've evolved. Democrats seem to be able to evolve. Republicans seem constantly stigmatized by the labels of racist, homophobic, bigoted, and they're never able to evolve themselves. Do you agree?
I think for stuff like this, you really have to go issue by issue. This idea that it's only a political thing. They talked about it in a prior panel here. When you bring up like, Republicans, the politicians, hold themselves to higher standards than the Democrats. I mean, Al Franken stepped down over some stupid pictures, and the entire Republican Party was backing Roy Moore. The idea that this is a standard that only applies to one party is a laughing stock. The only people that believe this get all of their news from 7 different Facebook
and
or
also
some shit,
all of their money from one side of the partisan.
Yeah, that too. Yeah.
I don't believe this either. I have to tell you, Brandon. I don't think it's true. I think it's a more complex picture than that. I do think that liberals are given more leeway because the prestige culture is left wing and because journalists point in a particular political direction. And if that's the sort of trivial point that your question is leading to, then yes, fine, I agree with you. I think more precisely, we have a lack of understanding on both sides about conservative media figures who dare to tiptoe into comedian or chat show host or something more than just barking in a podcast. Those people are not well understood and not really allowed to have jokes. Their jokes are treated like serious policy statements, and their serious opinions are kind of written off as jokes. Whereas on the left, we're happy to accommodate people like Jon Stewart and Bill Maher. I think it's a different hypocrisy. I think there is one, but I don't think it's the one you said.
One question, actually, I would have for Milo on that. So I'll play the other side on that a little bit. Do you think it's fair that you can evaluate the same joke differently depending on who it comes from?
No, not really, because I think lived experience is complete nonsense. I think if a joke is funny, it's probably funny whoever says it. I think it can sometimes be funnier if the speaker is talking about a group they know well or laughing at themselves. So I think when Chris Rock makes a joke about race relations that is obviously from his experience as a black guy, I think it makes his comedy a little funnier sometimes. But by and large, when you rip those jokes out of context, I think they're either funny or they're not. And I certainly don't think a joke goes from acceptable, funny, and safe for public consumption to unacceptable, cause for cancellation, and this person should get fired based on the speaker. No, I don't.
So this is something where I would completely disagree.
Wonderful.
And I'm curious on this. I feel like if you were to take a rural person and show them I don't watch much of his material, but like I'm pretty sure Larry the Cable Guy makes a lot of jokes about, hillbilly, redneck, stuff like that. If you were to take a joke that he says about those types of people, I feel like they could watch that and enjoy it and laugh at it a little bit more than, say, Dave Chappelle making the exact same joke. Even if the joke is the same, it feels like we kind of color the joke based on who it comes from. That if you know a certain disposition a person has, you know their beliefs, it's kind of okay if they joke about something, but if there's somebody else and you think that they might, actually be a little bit antagonistic or aggressive towards a certain topic, when they joke about it, it feels a little bit different. I feel like that's a fair stance that most people can take.
I think maybe it's just a difference of degree, because I kind of already granted you that maybe it's a little bit funnier if the person is laughing at themselves, or a little bit funnier if they have some direct knowledge of it. But only really that's a question about packaging more than anything else. I think that for the most part, a well-turned joke is pretty funny, whoever says it. Now, I mean, there are great insult comics from the past. Not many of them, alive anymore. But the great straight white males of the hectoring, badgering, curmudgeon type, right? Who would tell jokes about other racial groups that today might make us wince slightly. But I still would not consider them cause for cancellation or for concern. And I think the main reason for all of that is perhaps that I don't see comedy as a way to alienate. I think by far and away, the overall effect of comedy is to unify. There's a reason why chat-up lines are jokes at whoever's expense. I think comedy brings people together a lot more than it divides them. And I think comedy is laughing at whoever, maybe laughing at a group that's not here. Makes a connection. They're not affected by it. They don't have to watch you, but I'm making a connection with you, and we're laughing and we're bonding, and we might be bonding about the plight of white people and talking about how we had to be subjected to the sight of this royal wedding treatment on Fox News, of this gold coffin of this awful drug addict felon who held up a pregnant woman at gunpoint, a total scumbag that even Fox News was giving the royal wedding treatment to. I think it would be okay in that context. Excuse me. I think it'd be okay in that context to make some jokes about, black tantrums, for instance, in respect of rioting or whatever. So no, I can't agree. I think comedy brings people together a lot more than it drives them apart.
I mean, I don't think they're necessarily mutually exclusive positions. I think, I enjoy all sorts of humor. I think racial humor, dark humor, sex humor.
Degree.
I think, I agree with that. But I think we have to acknowledge that somebody like a white guy coming up, I don't know what I'm allowed to say here, but a white guy coming up and doing like Chris Rock's old incredibly famous skit that I'm not going to quote, versus Chris Rock giving that skit, it's going to be taken a lot differently
white
among
people
audiences.
In blackface doing the N-word family and that kind of thing.
Yeah, it's going to be taken a lot differently than which I think is fair, because I think it comes across a little
but who's
differently.
realistically actually going to do that? I mean, nobody. Who's going to watch it and enjoy it? Nobody. How many DVDs is this person going to sell? Nobody. I mean, who is that comic? I don't think they exist.
Sure.
So we have about 5 minutes before we're going to throw to audience questions. I want to touch on the issue of social justice, hate speech and social justice. Milo, does anti-white racism exist?
Racism of all kinds exists. If you have lived in America, around this country, in various different states for any length of time, you will know that the most racist group in the country is Hispanics. They hate absolutely everybody, including themselves, and everybody knows it. Absolutely. It's not even close. It's not even close. The way they talk about black people is monstrous. It is bone-shattering, the way that they talk about black people. The way they talk about themselves, almost as bad. The way they talk about white people, well, it's ungrateful and I'm indignant about it, but whatever. Who cares? But there is racism in all directions to all people. There's been an attempt recently to do this kind of postmodern exercise on the word racism, which is to deconstruct it and as you all know, reimagine it as a system of oppression that is exercised upon the powerless by the powerful. It's all bollocks. No one believes it. It's crap. I am perfectly happy to see wild allegations of racism, sexism, all the rest of it floating around society generally. Why? Because it tells us that the right and the left share some core values. We all think it's bad being mean to somebody because of their skin color and nothing else. We all think it's bad discriminating against somebody because of things they can't change about themselves. We all think it's bad treating women like crap. The reason that conservatives get so upset about the allegations and that left-wingers make them so often is that we fundamentally agree on the values in question. We're both agreed that racism is bad. We're both in agreement that we shouldn't be engaging in a lot of these antisocial, bigoted, and self-destructive behaviors. So I'm not too worried about the allegations floating around, but what your question's getting at, which is this postmodern deconstruction and attempt at a sort of restitching together of what racism is and what it means, the Robin DiAngelo white fragility thing, it's crap. It won't stick. It's got about another 5 years in it, and it's obviously nonsense. As anybody who has ever lived next to a Hispanic family knows, racism goes in all directions.
Stephen.
Yeah, so I would take the actual complete total opposite side of this. Unfortunately, I think when we talk about racism, I think you spend like 90% of the conversation defining, what does it mean to be racist? If you're going to talk on the individual level, can a Hispanic person be racist against a black person or a white person? As much as I'd love to fight Milo on that, half of my family is Cuban, and everything he said is absolutely true, unfortunately. But now, that being said, has the class of white people ever been demonstrably harmed by Hispanic people? Absolutely not. Has the class of white people ever been demonstrably harmed by the class of black people? Maybe a few more people on Twitter get banned for something or whatever, but like in terms... The Holocaust?
No.
Someone
had to say it.
Sorry.
Someone had to say it.
How long did it take us? How long did it take us to get to the Jews?
We did. No, we did good.
This is actually a record.
We did good.
Yeah.
But sir, that wouldn't be an
surprised.
example of white-on-white crime because Jews aren't white.
But real quick, so like I think that it is important sometimes that
what about the effect of Hispanics as a class on blacks as a class? Wage depression, the fact that in most societies, when you have waves of immigration, the previous ethnic group or the previous religious group, whichever one came in en masse, tends to move up. If you look at Indians from the subcontinent in Britain,
but
this
isn't race analysis. This is class analysis now, right? We're talking about new workers coming and displacing old workers.
Okay, but we're just saying, that the existence of lots of new illegal immigrants from Hispanic countries has a negative effect on the black population.
Lots of things. Very boring statement. Lots of things can impact lots of things in lots of ways. I think that it's important when we talk about like racism as a social construct that sometimes we need to understand, as a class, there are certain groups of people that might benefit from certain power structures that other groups of people don't, One popular divide right now in the feminist movement is realizing that white women have been the recipient of more affirmative action than any other single minority group. It's caused quite a split in feminists in terms of people of color in the feminist movement.
It seems to only be a surprise to liberals.
Well, no, I think most people understand it. But the issue is that you have to be able to have the conversation. Again, it's the same as the conversation we had earlier about cancel culture. If you want to acknowledge or fight against certain ideas of structural or systemic racism, that's fine. But you just have to understand the realities of what you're talking about. These people that like to pretend that, well, a black person and a white person pulled over in any city in the United States is going to be treated exactly the same. Okay. Everybody knows that's not true. Don't pretend that it is.
Fine. Obviously, it's trivially true that we should be able to have these conversations. I just reject your framing entirely. Left-wingers tend, on the whole, I'm making very broad generalizations here, tend to think in terms of systems. You're born into a system and, you have limited power over that system. Whereas right-wingers tend to think in terms of traditions. And because left-wingers think in terms of systems often in a more abstract sense, it's easier for them conceptually to break and remake them. Whereas conservatives want to kind of tinker with their institutions because they know it's from the institutions, Catholicism, capitalism, property rights, the rule of law and all the rest of it, that the strength and success of a society flows, the family. And I just completely reject the systems analysis that you're doing about structural racism. That doesn't mean that there aren't socioeconomic inequalities that stem from certain things, but the idea that can map onto allegations of racism and then suggest affirmative action programs or reparations. I actually don't mind the argument for reparations, but for very different reasons. The whole structural frame of critical race theory is complete horseshit. It is economic Marxism mapped onto social issues in a very shoddy fashion that doesn't work, and it will not work. It won't hold. It won't hold because it just doesn't bear the slightest bit of scrutiny. It doesn't work when you do it with gender. It doesn't work when you do it with race. It especially doesn't work when you do it with transgender circus people.
Sure. So
the systematic frameworks that the left use all the time. They say, well, we've got to be able to talk about these things. I will talk about these things, but I will not talk about them in the terms that you are asking me to, because the terms that are this is another. I'm not having a go at you, by the way. This is a very abstract thing about where the left argues from. Another thing they do, in addition to censorship, is setting the terms of debate by redefining words like racism. So, in order to have the discussion at all, you've already got to grant them the premise that racism is actually a function of a system, that privileges some above others, and there's this oppressive cloud, and it has various effects. You're granting so much of the enemy's argument that from that position you can only lose. And this is just entirely the wrong frame to look at anything, especially history.
Sure. While I can understand some of that, you're begging the question, if you agree with my definition of racism, I've already won half the argument, of course. There's a reason why we look at things in terms of like massive structure or systems. And that's because that's the level that government policy works at. One of the big frustrations that I have if I talk to conservatives is people want to reject any type of structural analysis in favor of, well, what can individuals do? Well, I don't know, but that doesn't really matter. We can't really affect an individual change on like a wider governmental level or even on a wider cultural level. Like we typically talk about these things in terms of people. Even if we look at like religious commandments, right? We talk about how men ought to act or how women ought to act or how the institution of the church, needs to do policy. If, you were Catholic, I was Catholic as well. I appreciated your earlier conversation about transubstantiation. You know that there's a structure even to the Catholic Church. You've got your archdiocese, you've got your rulings that come down from the Pope, you've got the catechism. Right. Even the Catholic Church acknowledges at some level of structure that's given to your entire class of people, and then that is actually broken down based on are you male, are you female?
But you're talking about institutional hierarchical organization. Mm-hmm. It's a completely different kind of thing from a social justice frame.
I think it's a
lens through which you look at
no,
these things.
I think that it's very valuable to be able to look at groups of people and to make statements about how people act and then how they ought to act. I mean, we need to have those conversations. Okay, but that's
broadened your claim out to the point where nobody could disagree.
Well, that's literally what critical race theory.
The point I was trying to make was that. I'm sorry, I did interrupt you.
No, go ahead.
The point that I was trying to make is that very often we have these debates, and indeed the one we've had tonight has been an example of this. We have the debates on their turf. Now, as it happens, he and I agree on some core civic values that I think most respectable, reasonable people will agree on. We will disagree horribly on all kinds of other things that are outside the scope of the debate tonight, I'm sure. But just to give you an example, when does comedy go too far? Well, you can look at it from the point of view of offense-taking, social justice, and the rest of it, or you could reframe it. You could say, well, comedy actually means something completely different in the real world, in literature, for instance. What kind of comedy are we talking about? Are we talking about paradisical, purgatorial, or infernal? Infernal comedy, following Dante, is very much what we see online, and that's disembodied, demonic, and dreadful. Purgatorial comedy, which is the kind of thing you're talking about, like stand-up jokes going too far, is something is rooted in the possibility of redemption. So, are we talking about whether these people can be saved from their own whatever? I'm getting off the point, but I'm trying to explain to you that there are frames that we can talk from that have first of all, they're much more useful and much more interesting. They draw on a body of literature and history that lefties just don't know. And they also get us much closer to the truth, much closer to enlightenment, and much closer to one another. And
Milo.
Almost every debate I've heard in the last 5 years has started over there, and we've been scrambling to grab the debate field back from them since they've demanded that to even speak at all, we've got to use their language. So this is what I'm trying to encourage you to do in your debates with your friends, is just say, whoa, 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 take a step back, all that shit, let's start again.
Milo, we're going to have to leave it there because we're going to take some audience questions before we wrap up tonight.
There's been a lot of agreement between you in this talk, a surprising amount. I'm going to try and drive a bit of a wedge into that now. I have a bit of a blind spot for Stephen, but I'm interested in this, Milo mentioning very early on in the talk about how bullying should be encouraged. And I'd like to talk about maybe the importance of making people, or what is the obligation of us to make people less fragile and more resilient to the effects of words? And also, is there value in the idea of banter or dark humor in bringing people together and actually bringing us closer? If we're recognizing our differences and we're making humor about that, is that building? Can that also be a force to build bridges of trust and bring us together?
I can be super quick and give him most of the time. First of all, it's bullying and building resilience through stress and through inclement circumstances isn't just a good thing. It's absolutely necessary for people to build healthy, happy psyches. And second of all, is teasing and all the rest of it, is this a kind of acceptable way to go on? Is this a good thing? It is an absolutely critical and indispensable way that men communicate. And one of the reasons that ridicule and criticism has been so maligned online is that our discourse has become very heavily feminized. So ridicule and criticism have become recast as abuse and harassment, because when you say mean things to women, they cry. And we don't want to be like that because we're nice gentlemen who are chivalric and we don't want to see women cry in public. But the fact is that taunting, teasing, being mean to one another is how men bond. You will never change that. All you will do is drive it underground and make it surface in eruptions if you try to suffocate it. This kind of thing you're talking about, bullying, taunting, being mean, trolling, it is what men are. Especially working class men, by the way, which is why so much of this debate is rooted in class, because a lot of this is a class war against middle class journalists on working class people. But being mean to one another is something women do behind one another's backs and men do to each other's faces. You will never change that. You will never fix that. But the way that men are with one another, this is what's being driven out of public life and being maligned, and it is absolutely devastating for the modern male.
Yeah, the idea that you have to be a bully to be a man is such an emasculating way of looking at masculine. Well, yeah, but this idea that like bullying is inseparable from the identity of being masculine, I think is incredibly silly. I think it's important to recognize that there are different types of bullying. If we're going to say that like should you be able to tease your friend over something or make fun of something, I think that's fine. Bullying a kid every single day at school to the point to where he's crying and then goes home and hates his life, probably not okay. I think one of these we can make. Sure, yeah, I think it's important to clarify what we mean when we say bullying. In terms of like, there are a lot of old ideas that we have about what makes a good person and what makes a resilient person. But the problem is all we see are the success stories. And there's a lot of stuff that we know that we used to think was really good that just doesn't work. For instance, like spanking your children. It just doesn't work. And we've looked at this, study after study after study, result after result after result. Every now and then you'll get a very successful person that survived it. But what you don't see is the thousands of people whose attachments to other people in life are ruined, who are depressed, who can't form healthy relationships. You don't see all those people. You only see the one successful guy that survived it. And now you must think, oh, well, I guess these people are very resilient, ignoring all of the failures behind that person.
I was spanked as a child growing up, and I will spank my children when I have children one day. Just putting that out there.
Yeah, I mean,
I am pro spanking.
It's not the first thing you try to use with kids. I mean, I've kind of inherited kids now. I've got a stepson and a step nephew who live with us, 16 and 17. It's certainly not the first thing that Dad reaches for, but here's another thing that a lot of the women won't like. I heard a lot of muttering and sighing because they don't like it when you tell them the truth. Well, fortunately, I don't want to fuck any of you, so I can tell you what I think. So another thing you might not like to know is men need to be afraid of their dads. And so do girls, especially women, actually, because women who aren't afraid of their dads go out and get husbands they're not afraid of either, and they're both fucking miserable. There's an extent to which being aware of your dad's power as a man helps you to come to understand your own and helps you to learn to channel and manage and control it rather than sublimating it with drugs and turning into a school shooter, which is what we have now.
I think real quick, I think it's really important to recognize that respect doesn't have to come through fear. And I think that everybody...
Where does it come from, then?
Let's think about it.
The threat of consequences if you define authority.
One of my favorite go-to examples is every single person in here, assuming you've graduated through the school system, has known one of two types of teachers. There is one teacher that will give you a demerit or a detention or a mark on whatever card, no matter what stupid little thing you do. They exercise their authority over you at every given opportunity. And then you have that one teacher that you have so much respect for. They might have passion for what they teach. They might treat their students with respect. And you can get a million detentions from the earlier teacher that's so quick to send you to the principal's office. But if you disappoint the latter a single time, you feel so horrible.
I think it's a terrible analogy because since when were 14-year-olds afraid of getting detention? For a lot of young people, it's a badge of honor.
There aren't a lot of 14-year-olds.
No one's afraid of that. That doesn't produce fear. And those teachers who are nice, who you say are respected, they're not respected. They were pandering and trying to be the kids' friends. And the kids got away with murder, so they remember them fondly.
How many 16, 17-year-olds have been hit by their dad so many times they just don't care anymore about it? They'd eventually go off to do drugs.
That's a different issue.
No, it's the exact same thing.
Okay, guys. We've got a long line of people who'd like to ask some questions. Let's keep the answers brief.
That was a good wedge.
We will do parenting next week. Next week, parenting.
Sir.
To start with, Milo, I'd like to compliment your fashion feng shui. Those shoes go well with your outfit.
I was worried. I was worried because I was getting dressed.
Worry not. You look sexy, dude.
I was getting dressed indoors, and it's very difficult without LEDs or natural light to know exactly how it's all going to come together. But thank you.
You made the comment in the hotel. I saw you. I wasn't sure if it was you. You know how I knew it was you?
The
I looked down,
shoes.
you were wearing some sparkly fucking boots, and I was like, that's got to be Milo.
I was
in Milwaukee. There's no way that's anybody but Milo.
I was in gold boots. It's true. I was in gold boots. I was
Milo.
in gold. Well, thank you.
I'd like to read you the words of a wiser man. It's as if our moral safeguards are broken down by the new landscape in which the default is attack, such that we forget that there's a person or a human being on the other side. So perhaps what's needed now is a bolder form of censure. After all, the internet is not a universal right. If people cannot be trusted to treat others with respect, dignity, and consideration, perhaps they deserve to have their online freedoms curtailed.
I wrote this quote down for.
No. This is what this wiser person. He is, of course, recalling my own youthful self.
From the current. Of course.
This is one of my favorite kinds of questions. As I said this evening, I have matured since 2015. My 2015 position was very different from that. I think it's reasonable because the online landscape is completely different than 10 years ago when I wrote that, or 8 years ago when I wrote that. It does not bear any relation whatsoever. In the very early days of Twitter, I took a slightly different view of trolls than I later came to hold, which was actually that they were the last precious keepers of polemic and ultimately civil disobedience, and of course, Gamergate and everything like that. I embraced them fully, and I still do like trolls and all the rest of it. My problems with free speech come from people typically come now, I think, from people abusing positions of power. I still love a good troll. So I don't think when the internet changes as much and as dramatically as it does over the years, that it's unreasonable that a commentator's views would mature with it. But I appreciate the audacity and I appreciate the effort.
So Milo has evolved. Stephen, do you have any comments? Or was that just for
no,
Milo?
I mean, I actually had read that quote. A lot of my opposition research was relating to your early publications, but I actually find that your current point of view actually seems to coincide somewhat with that. I don't know if you would be completely in disagreement about a lot of what even that quote in and of itself. That there's a lot of people
I think
online.
I shot to an extreme, and I'm settling on a more reasonable position.
Yeah, possibly.
I think it's fair to
One
say.
thing that also, I think trolling has changed a lot too. When we talk about a troll like 10 or 15 years ago, the idea of being a troll was that you knew you were saying some dumb shit, but that's what made it funny. Nowadays, it's hard to tell who knows if they're
Right,
being
and
dumb or not.
now there are layers of irony.
Yeah.
There are movements that Gamergate was this example where actually things could be accomplished, or at least culture could be changed by large, somewhat organized groups of people who you would call trolls, but they were acting in a particular direction with a particular motivation in mind. So I thank you. That's generous of you to help me out like that. But I also think, yes, the definition of troll has changed somewhat too.
Earlier it was stated that people should be deplatformed for having the wrong ideas. My question is, who gets to form the Committee for the Preservation of Virtue and the Prevention of Vice? And
you hear him?
if you give...
Sir, can you speak up a little bit? We're having a little trouble up here.
Oh, shall I start from the beginning?
I heard from who gets... Okay.
Okay. Who gets to decide who forms the Committee for the Preservation of Virtue and the Prevention of Vice? And if you set that structure...
Well, there's a
and
nice
give that
building
power,
in the middle of Rome. It's St. Peter's. You walk in, it's a lovely circular colonnade. And you just
I'm
walk
not
through the door,
finished with my question,
and you get to
Milo.
St. Peter's Basilica. And in St. Peter's Basilica, you will find all the answers you're seeking.
Go ahead and
I
finish,
heard
sir,
that.
and ignore him.
If once you set that structure and give that power, are you willing to accept that the committee could be formed by the Westboro Baptist Church?
Yeah, I mean, I imagine this is probably a question for me. I mean, it would depend on the particular issues we're talking about regulating. So let me be very clear, because I get misquoted on this all the time. Honestly, and I get a lot of flack for this, I don't really care that much about hate speech on public platforms. I mean, you probably shouldn't do it because you're a jerk if you do it, but I don't care about like banning or whatever. What I care about are people that come out and say things like I've brought this up several times, like vaccinations aren't real, or Hillary Clinton like flew the plane with the uranium on it to drop cash off to Iran and then went and visited Putin, and then they went underneath some pizza place and had sex with 35 kids or whatever. Like, this is the kind of stuff that I'm looking at when I'm like, what am I reading? Because I think that this stuff is
Trump
truly...
colluded with Russia.
Well,
Well,
no, that was actually a Mueller investigation that was actually federally
Thank
funded.
you,
That actually produced a lot of credible
Thank you.
indictments. So I would say that's a far different thing. But I'm talking
General
about like
Flynn, Roger Stone, we get the idea.
Sure, I'm talking about stuff that is like just demonstrably not true information that's being published online, especially in like a scientific arena. This is the kind of stuff that I think is like just damaging to public discourse. Like when we get these conspiracy theories out here, we're not even having good conversations anymore. We're just arguing over which pizza shop was the whatever Britney Spears or somebody hidden, and I think that's ridiculous.
I think that's true, and I want to pay you a compliment. I know that I'll be as fast as I can. I had an online debate with Mr. Jingles or whatever his name was, and I was really horrified this evening was going to go the same way, and I thought, fuck, things are so much worse than they were 5 years ago, and they've got so much worse while I was away. I don't know if I want to do this anymore. This evening has completely changed my mind about that, and I'm sure on future occasions we will have much more I'm sure that on future occasions we will have much more testy exchanges, and I look forward to them, and I look forward to us besting one another in both directions. But the particular kind of hysterical, I think he was a little bit Adderalled up, hysterical, bad faith debate bro bullshit that I had from this guy made me think, fuck, the left is trying to imitate our energy of 2016, but they got nothing new to say. These are cardboard cutouts repeating the same old tired platitudes, and I'm fucking no thanks. I'm going to go back to building houses for a living.
I actually saw
But tonight
that.
has completely changed my mind, and I just want to thank you for being here and having such a nice conversation with us, because it is greatly to your credit that you have the intelligence that you do, but also the integrity and decency to have a real conversation, because it isn't that common. When was the last time somebody from his side I mean, look, he's not Marxist, whatever. He's, somewhere in the middle of the left. But when was the last time any of them showed up and had the basic courtesy and intellectual honesty and decency to have a good discussion?
Well, that's a
like this?
backhanded compliment if you ever got one.
It's rare.
All right,
So,
sir, go ahead.
Hi. So I have a question. When it comes to like the safe spaces that are going around in college campuses, how can someone combat that?
I know you. I can't see you, but I know
Yeah,
your voice.
I know
All right.
you too.
Go ahead. Go ahead. Sorry.
So when it comes to the safe
the bathrooms
spaces
45 minutes ago by the
that
sound
are
of it.
going around in college campuses, how can someone combat the safe space culture when people nowadays are so fucking sensitive?
Okay, so I think that safe spaces are incredibly valuable to have in areas where they're appropriate. I don't know what happened, but somewhere in the American education system, we forgot the idea that like through education, that's like the safest time in your life to introduce you to opinions that might bother you. I think that there's a lot of value in having a room or a space where I just want to vent about something and I don't want somebody to judge me for it. I don't care. I just want to complain about this shit and be done with it. I think that's fine. But the idea that you're starting to put trigger warnings on like world history courses, that's absolutely insane to me. I think college should be a time where you are challenged, where you have to confront ideas that might make you uncomfortable, because that's part of growing up. And if there's any time in your life where you're going to have the opportunity to take an idea, dissect it in a classroom among peers and understand it, it's going to be college. So I think that the concept of a safe space is very valuable. It's very good. We shouldn't lose that. But the idea of making everything a safe space is absolutely ridiculous. And I think it's misused too much.
I think you're a
reasoning
conservative. I think
disproves
you're a
your-
liberal, and I'm getting very confused by this conversation.
No, look, I think safe spaces kill people. I think trigger warnings are massively counterproductive, insulating people from trauma they need to confront so they get over it, get used to it. Exposure therapy is the only way to help if you have traumatic experiences in your life. You have to expose yourself to little doses of it until it doesn't bother you anymore. Trigger warnings are a fast track to mental illness and suicide. So I'm glad we at least have 2 or 3 things we disagree with.
Sir.
First of all, I want to thank you all, for both of you, for coming. I know y'all are incredibly busy, and I really appreciate the conversation that y'all had, because to be honest with you, I usually disagree with both of you all a lot. I'm gonna be honest with you. Milo, it's really fucking hard to disagree with you because I really appreciate the way you dress. It's really hard. I'm not gonna lie.
It's not by accident, sir. It's not an accident. I've got the accent and I've got the suits. And, if I show up with a good argument, that for me is a good day.
Listen, I can relate. So with that being said, I do have to ask you something. So earlier you challenged Stephen, right? I know you don't like going by Destiny, right? So you challenged Stephen's idea of systemic racism, but you didn't actually offer. You was like, you kind of went on a tirade about like, it's framing is bad. Framing is bad. We got to do it from a different frame. We got to frame. And I'm like, okay, I'm waiting for him to give me an example of why his definition was wrong, because I can just point to a simple example that I used on my panel earlier, which is FDR introducing the New Deal, which introduced the Federal Housing Administration that made sure black people cannot move into the suburbs, which of course means they can only get public housing, which means they can't get real education because 93% of all education is funded by property taxes, and therefore, I think that's a system.
You've done a good job already of making my point for me, which is one not based on some nebulous concept of past trauma inflicted on one group to the other. Because when we talk about, the harm done to black people, we're talking about their feelings. We're talking about the legacy of.
We're not talking about their feelings. We're talking about.
They're talking about their feelings. But a much more useful frame, which you've just provided, which I think is illustrating my point for me, is economic. Economic self-interest of various ethnic groups.
Perpetuated by what?
perpetuated by the self-interest of different ethnic groups. And you can't say white people. Understand that America is not a monolith. You can't generalize about white people, just like we don't generalize, or we should not generalize, about the black community.
But we have laws about it.
LA blacks are very different from East Coast blacks.
We have laws about it.
Can I just say something real quick? So I'm a debater. I know what you're doing. All right. Listen, I got you. I understand what you're doing. But I never said anything about white people. I said the system.
See, I got the suits. You got the cute little thing you're doing.
That's what I try. I try. I know. So, but I'm talking specifically
he's getting me all hot and bothered, so I can't think clearly.
Trust me, I tend to have that effect on both genders, so it's cool. But in all seriousness, when where I didn't say about white people, I said the system perpetuated, and the white people, if you want to say that, use the system to perpetuate a very specific targeted racism. So how do you not accept his framework without offering?
Well, because I don't think race is the primary motivating element in any of this.
It doesn't have to be the primary motivating element, but if we say, for instance, it's funny because conservatives will talk about how important the family is, and we should focus on the family, or how important your culture is, and we should focus on the culture. Yeah. Well, oftentimes, what does the success of our parents come from? It comes from where they live. It comes from what their grandparents did. It came from where they lived. It came from the schools they went to, and the neighborhoods that they lived in, and the communities that they were a part of. But we had laws on the books, not even one generation ago, that literally said, you can't live here, not if you're poor, not if you are, wear your pants a certain way, not if you listen to too much rap music, but if you're black. And I'm not going to say that every single problem that black America or white America has today can go back to racist laws on the books, but to say that it has no impact is fantastical.
I didn't say it had no
okay.
impact. I don't think any of us are really disagreeing on anything. I find other explanations for the plight of black America more compelling than the mysterious and powerful supernatural force of white supremacy and structural racism. I find other explanations much more compelling: religious explanations, economic explanations, geographic explanations, historic explanations. I find lots of other
economic,
things.
geographic, historic that were all influenced by.
Well, obviously,
race.
obviously, all these things are interrelated. There are people.
The intersectional
there are
argument.
people. Somebody that I would not. I am intersectional, of course.
I am too.
Everyone's intersectional to the extent that they understand that things affect each other. So if you have an intersectional identity, it means your life is shit for more than one reason. Like everybody gets that idea. It's not like it's not like some intersectionality detected. We're all intersectional because we all understand that things can have more than one cause.
I think that's a really good point, and we probably do agree on most things. I think sometimes it leaves a bad taste in your mouth. If you have a room full of black people and a room full of white people, and everybody has $100, and you take $90 from every black person, and then when people go to try to buy stuff, you say, hey, well, this is an economic problem now, not a race problem.
It's because you're on that side of the room.
Yeah, I think it leaves a bad taste in my mouth. It's like, well, yeah, is it kind of economics? Is it kind of region? Yeah, but a lot of this stuff back on the books.
I think we could talk for a while about why that analogy.
All right, guys, we have about 5 minutes and 2 more questions.
I think again we're at a difference of emphasis rather than some horrible clash of worldviews.
Go ahead.
So, hi, Milo. I don't know if you remember me, but I am Mr. Jingles.
Hello.
So I've actually been really.
Well, I'm so glad you're here. Do you see how it's supposed to be done?
Yeah, I know. I was actually very.
Oh, this awful. So no, dog. No, buddy.
Your white fragility is showing right now, Milo. Calm down.
This is very upsetting to me. It's because, I have just been informed that that you had a very, very negative experience when you interacted with me, and I hope you can accept my explanation that was by no means my intention. I did not mean to offend you, but because I did read White Fragility from front to back, I know that just because I didn't mean to offend you doesn't
Adderall
mean...
again. You see, this is your problem. You got to slow down, sweetheart.
Okay.
Slow down, relax. We're all here for you.
Thank you.
We're gonna hear you to the end.
You truly are my buddy. Thank you very much.
Well, maybe now. Maybe
Call
now.
him your dog.
Maybe now.
Call him your dog. Come on.
All right. Okay.
All right. I just want
you're going to make me apologize to you earlier. Remember when you said that? You said I had to apologize to you, and now you won't even call him your dog?
Now, and I do have a question.
I excused you from issuing any kind of apology.
What's the next question?
I'm not excusing him because he was a shit. It was a nasty.
Do you have a question?
Shit, arguing and
I would
in
love
bad
to ask
faith.
it eventually.
But
why
don't we just
hear what it is?
Look, the reason that I offered for me to come back on again is because they paid me to appear, and I felt bad about what a fucking car crash it was. So that's why I wrote and said I had a bad experience. And the moderator wrote back and said, I'll find you somebody who argues in better faith.
He was not satisfied with the Jangles product.
So what I will say is I'm very happy to have another conversation with you, and maybe we could start fresh.
Well, my question might actually help with that because, like I said, I did not mean to offend. I did not think that the words buddy and dog would be so negatively impactful for you. But again, I want to take those seriously. So I want, based on your conversation, I would like to, maybe you can help me with this. What is the difference between getting genuinely righteously offended against a genuine slight versus an offense that maybe, like you said earlier, that you should probably just get over?
I'm in a bad position to answer that question because I can't really remember being seriously offended in my life. I understand that sometimes people claim to be, but I've no real direct knowledge of what it feels like. It strikes me as enormously and profoundly silly. And I really don't know what people mean when they say I'm offended. I think what they mean is I don't have an argument for you. I just don't really know what people mean by it.
Okay, that's good to hear. I don't know if that feedback will help me.
It's not a great answer, but it's the truth.
Thank you. Last question.
Hi, my question is for Stephen, actually. So this is a question I haven't heard an answer for yet, and I'm hoping you can answer it for me. So if we're to go back to redefining racism, right? If we are to accept the definition, the new redefinition of racism being what we used to call systemic racism, so this whole prejudice plus power definition, the way that gets watered down when it reaches the masses is that it's therefore impossible to be racist towards white people. And the same thing with sexism. They say it's impossible to be sexist towards men. So if we're teaching people that essentially it's impossible to be racist towards one race or sexist towards one sex, at what measurable end goal will we just suddenly decide, hey, now it's possible to be racist towards white people again, or hey, now it's possible to be sexist towards men? And then how do we teach these generations of children that we've taught?
It's such a good question.
Yeah.
How do we get there?
I think it's an
How do we
absolutely
get where these
horrible
guys
question.
want to go so we can stop hearing about it?
This is easily one of the most boring topics that ever comes up. I think that, and this is why I think that if you're a lefty or liberal, whatever you want to call yourselves, neo-progressive, I don't know, just see the definitions. I think that there is an interesting conversation to be had about how groups of people can exert power over other groups of people. I am incredibly and intensely bored over how we use the word racism. I think that most of us would agree that there's a difference between a group of people enacting racism against another group of people. I think everybody would agree with that, unless you're delusional. And I think we all agree that on an individual level, all of us can exert some level of racism. Even the most well, maybe not the most hardcore, but like 95% of people in the political spectrum would agree that black people or Hispanic people can be racist towards white people. But you would have to be crazy to think that black people as a group or Hispanic people as a group can enact any kind of meaningful harm on white people as a group when we hold like all of the major dominant positions.
But that's not the point of her question.
Like murder rates, for goodness sake? I mean, look at the black criminality is complete disproof of this silly statement.
But black criminality doesn't affect most people. There's like 10 cities in the U.S. where black criminality has any impact on some group of white people.
I also just can't accept this thing like, oh, I'm so bored of hearing about that. We just had our entire country ripped apart on this exact question. On this precise question. The left is trying to redefine the most important word in America's history, which is racism. America is unintelligible without an understanding of racial politics, and racism and what we think of each other is the central animating concern of the entire American project. America is a creation of black and white, and they have never existed in the harmony that they should, thanks to one original sin, and thanks later to malevolence from Democrats, ignorance and stupidity from Republicans. Now there are other things coming into the mix with new kinds of immigration. Racism I know that you're saying that you're bored of the definitions game, but you can't afford to be, because the central animating question of the next 10, 20 years is going to be, do we accept this new version of racism, which paints white people as the eternal oppressors?
As white people become a minority in this country.
At least the oppressors in our lifetime, and which, as a result of the Democrat Party's embrace of Black Lives Matter, will inevitably, if they get a president in the office, and you always, I must just be stern with you just this once, you're always talking about how you want to bring back policy, laws, who's passing this stuff, Congress. Well, the Democrat Party has embraced Black Lives Matter, which means that the Democrat Party has embraced this new definition of the most important word in American history. And if they get a president in November, they will attempt and probably succeed to pass laws based on that new definition. So I just think it's absurdly stupid and lazy, and I'm sorry, just unacceptable to say, I'm sorry, I'm just bored about this linguistics discussion.
I mean, if we were to
Stephen,
talk
this is
about
going to be the final word.
Yeah, sure.
You
I
can't,
mean,
you don't get to be bored by it.
the boring part is that, like, if I have a conversation with a conservative on this, I already know that saying, like, prejudice plus power is going to trigger the ever-living fuck out of them, and we can't ever... So I'll just say, like, yeah, I'm talking about systemic racism, is what I'll say. And then let's have a conversation about systemic racism, not should racism be defined as the same or different thing from systemic racism. And the idea that, like, future policy is going to be written based on the redefining of these words. I mean, we already have protected classes. They don't exclude white people, even if they seem to on Twitter. If you have a building and you're renting to a family and you say no whites allowed, or you say no men allowed, you're going to be held under the same federal housing standards that you would under any other platform. The idea that, like, this obsession over how we define a word, it's like the most first world problem ever. When I have a conversation with a conservative, if you want to say that, well, racism is just any time you prejudice somebody against somebody based on their skin color, that's fine. That's okay. Then let's just talk about systemic or structural racism.
I don't think it's the most first world problem in the world. I think the way in which we're speaking about it is a privileged debate stage way of talking about something that the entire country is living. And the problem itself, we have discussions with it based on, linguistics, which or definitions that we hope get us to the truth and hope get us to understanding each other's positions. But the rest of the country is living this stuff.
But they're not. This is the whole point, though.
Consideration.
They don't live the types of racism that we talk about on stage. How much racism did we talk about up here that had to do with getting banned off of Twitter? Wait, how much did we talk about?
Okay, guys, we're nowhere near resolution, and we're out of time. We're out of time.
Talking about Floyd and structural racism, my entire family is...
Milo, we're out of time.
Nothing else.
Stephen, we're out of time. Stephen, I need you to take your mask off. You two kiss. And we're done. We're done. We're done. No, thank you guys so much. I think that was a really productive and good conversation. And very respectful. Way to go, guys.
I did not envy Brandon his job walking into this, trying to keep the two of us under
because
control,
of you.
Given our respective reputations. And it turned out that only I was the problem. So, Brandon Strake, thank you very much as well. Thank you.